Everyone is tolerant for people in their own social circle. That's the problem. The mental leap has to be, even though it doesn't make any sense to me, I couldn't imagine living that way, I think it's wrong, but they still have the right to live, they still have the right to express their opinions.
Mr. Pinke, for me, tolerance means enduring the expression of views I do not agree with. What is your definition of tolerance?
Well, I don't like defining terms because it means whatever people mean by it when they use it. Certainly in the intellectual sphere, that would be a good definition of tolerance. There's also tolerance in terms of people living together in the same country.
Yes.
But yes, that's probably the definition that is quite relevant today.
In my view, the general population has become very tolerant towards other opinions and lifestyles if you compare it to the last 50 years or 50 years ago. So, but even people in woke circles at the university seem to embrace tolerance. They push inclusivity and diversity. On the other hand, these same circles are enforcing cancel culture, are suppressing other opinions. So in your view, how does this even fit together?
Yeah, it's easy to tolerate people just like you, or people in your culture, your subculture, but you put your finger on it. It's not clear how much tolerance there would be, for example, for a conservative political position, or say a fundamentalist Christian lifestyle. So there's everyone is tolerant for people in their own social circle. That's the problem. The mental leap has to be, even though it doesn't make any sense to me, I couldn't imagine living that way, I think it's wrong, but they still have the right to live, they still have the right to express their opinions.
So how do you see the universities these days, if you look at topic of woke?
Not so good, and I speak from a university that was just recently rated in last place among 248 American universities. That is also perhaps the world's most famous university, Harvard University, my employer. And there is an organization in the United States that I support, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, which ranks universities in terms of both the attitudes towards students. Do they think it's okay to use violence to shut down what they consider to be a dangerous speaker? And does the campus engage in intellectual repression, like disinviting controversial speakers or removing people from courses if there's controversial content? And Harvard University, world's most famous, last place, with a score of 0.
0. Okay.
So I'm working. So so the answer is not too good. I'm part of a group of professors at Harvard that is pushing back against that. We have founded a new Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard, and we have met with our new president and with our new dean, and we are going to be active in supporting people who have been canceled, in applying policies that the university already has for academic freedom, but everyone has forgotten about.
Yes.
And and hopefully changing some policies, starting with we would like to have the university adopt what are called the Calvin principles, K-A-L-V-E-N, no relation to your countryman, John Calvin.
Okay.
And this is that universities should not take public statements on controversies and issues of the day. That is, if there's a killing, a war, a police shooting, universities should not issue a statement on their official opinion. Now, this has been especially in the news in the last month because although Harvard and many other universities has a long history of issuing statements, say when there was the killing of George Floyd, an African American, by a white policeman in Minneapolis, universities all issued a statement on how horrendous this was. But then when 1,400 Jews were massacred by Hamas, the universities were silent. In the case of Harvard, the president issued a statement not really mentioning the 1,400 Jews, just saying that she was against violence on both sides. She was severely criticized, came out with a second statement, criticized for that, then came out with a third statement. We on the council think that that presidents could stay out of trouble and could promote academic freedom and tolerance if the university was the forum for discussion, debate, deliberation, but did not itself take one side or another.
But this is a new thing, that suddenly everyone expects from everyone to have a moral statement on anything. This wasn't like this before.
Well, it was actually, it began, I think, during the era of the Vietnam War, because the Calvin principles came out of the University of Chicago in 1967. So already it was an issue back then, and we're talking, 55 years. Mm-hmm. So it's not new, but I think you're right, though, that it has increased.
Mm-hmm. So in general, is tolerance inherent in human nature, or is it a human achievement?
I would say it's a human achievement.
Yeah.
I think what's natural is to think that the people who disagree with me are dangerous, are foolish, and they should be suppressed for the common good. Mm-hmm. That's the natural reaction. Mm-hmm. Tolerance, the idea that even if I disagree with someone, they have a right to express their opinions, let alone exist and not be killed, is I think it is an achievement of the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And the scientific revolution. There were predecessors in ancient Greece, of course, but it is not a natural principle, and like Sisyphus, we constantly have to push that rock up the hill.
Mm. In 2018, you called identity politics an enemy of reason and enlightenment value. Is really identity politics a huge enemy of that?
Well, yes, and I'm referring not only to the huge polarization, especially in the United States, that makes it impossible for the government to do anything, but also experiments that show that political identity interferes with reasoning. And I'll give you a couple of examples. You take a policy, like policy for healthcare, and you tell people in the United States, this is from the Democratic Party, the left of center party. People on the left will say, great policy, this is a great way to save money, make people healthier. People on the right say, oh, terrible policy, a waste of money, people will get sicker. You present the same policy and you just say, this came from the Republican Party, the right-wing party, and people's reactions are flipped. Same policy. So that's one example. Another example, you give people a logical syllogism from Logic 101, freshman logic. If A, then B, A, therefore B. If the conclusion is one that is congenial to a left-wing position, then even if the syllogism is invalid, if it commits a fallacy, like the fallacy of affirming the consequent, you ask them, is this logically sound? Does the conclusion follow from the premises? They'll say yes, as long as they want the premise to be true. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, and conservatives say we'll spot the fallacy. Now, of course, it's not that conservatives are logical and leftists are illogical, because if you then have another syllogism where the conclusion is congenial to a right-wing position, then it flips. Now the left-wingers are the logicians and the right-wingers commit the fallacy. Yeah. I'll give you a third example, is if you give people the result of a hypothetical study and you show them data that come out of what the social scientists found. And you say, does it support the conclusion? And the conclusion might be, say, in the United States, gun control, very polarized issue. Does it show that gun control works? And same numbers, people on the left will say that the study is sound if the results seem to show that gun control works. People on the right, the other way around. You just have the same numbers, change the wording, and then the opinions differ. And even people who are mathematically sophisticated will commit basic statistical errors. They'll forget to control for the overall proportion or base rate if the conclusion is consistent with the position they hold in the first place. So these are laboratory studies that confirm the impression of people who read the news that polarization gets in the way of rationality.
So we fight all the time these days, but we have, as a society, achieved immense progress of individual liberties and living conditions, thanks to the values of enlightenment. So my view is that the left does not really acknowledge this immense progress of these last 200 years. Why not?
Yes, as I like to say, progressives hate progress. Because and by the way, I should add that there is a strain of conservatism, a kind of reactionary conservatism that also hates progress. So it's not just the left. It would seem to vindicate kind of the establishment, liberal democracy, regulated markets, regulated capitalism. And if you are ideologically opposed to modernity, to the institutions of government and commerce, then to acknowledge that it's made life better means that you're wrong, or at least you're if you believe that current institutions are inherently corrupt, rotten, have to be burned down and replaced, then it's embarrassing that actually they're better than the alternative. And that kind of radicalism, there's a left-wing version, and as we see in the United States, there's a right-wing version.
Would you call yourself a progressive or a liberal?
The words are so ambiguous.
Yeah.
I mean, yes and yes in the technical meanings of the words. I do believe in liberalism in the sense of individual freedom, in the sense that states and governments are social contracts that exist to protect the interests of individuals, that there are universal human rights, that freedom is a primary right, free speech is a primary right. All of those can be called liberal. I'm a progressive in the sense that I think that progress is possible. I think we ought to improve society, improve the world, look for flaws and problems and make them better. On the other hand, the words liberal and progressive both have connotations today that don't just mean in favor of freedom or in favor of progress. Liberal has different meanings in the United States and in Europe.
Totally.
Here, I think what people often call liberal in the United States might be called libertarian. That is minimum regulation in the workplace, minimum taxation, and together with civil liberties, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. In the United States, liberalism often means leftism. Likewise, progressivism, especially in the United States, even more than liberal, tends to mean left-wing position.
There is a moral source offered by the Enlightenment which is secular. Still, I have the impression that the absence of religion in our Western world leaves many people feeling lost, and they are looking for spirituality. So how could the secular worldview offer spirituality?
Yes, well, if it's spirituality in the sense of believing in supernatural beings, ghosts, spirits, saints, gods, heaven, hell.
That's religion.
That's religion, yeah. So that kind of spirituality, I think we can do without. If it's a sense of awe and wonder and appreciation of mystery, the kind that one gets from great works of art, the kind that one gets from contemplation, from meditation, that would be a valuable thing. And I think it would be good if we had promotion of art forms, of voluntary associations that allow people to appreciate that. Also, one of the things that religion delivers that is very healthy is just community organizations, times and places where people get together, they make friends, they make contacts, their kids meet each other. And it is true that churches and synagogues had that role. As people fall away because they just can't go with the God stuff, then they're also losing out on the community.
So back to progress. Human ingenuity is the ultimate resource. So with enough of it, we can eliminate every bottleneck, I think. Will AI help us with that?
Yeah, I think it could. It's that just as computers since the 1950s have taken over tasks that are the human mind has trouble with, looking up information, doing calculations, doing simulations. I see it as a continuation of that process. There are many things that the human mind can't do very well, integrating information from multiple sources to come to a decision. Say there's a lot of symptoms that a patient has. The patient also has a unique genome. Patient also has a unique history of metabolism. The patient belongs to a particular ethnic group, particular age, particular sex. No human doctor can integrate all that information and make the best possible diagnosis. I think there's enormous scope for artificial intelligence to improve human decision making. Digesting a large scientific literature. No human can read all the papers on a given topic. There are a lot of jobs that are dangerous and boring. If we had robots that replaced humans, that would be a benefit to humanity.
Did you try out ChatGPT, for example, already?
Oh, everyone's trying to ChatGPT.
Sure.
Yes, I have.
Do you use it already for work?
Rarely.
Rarely, yeah. Me too.
I certainly don't use it to generate prose. But as I had hopes for as an intelligent search engine, because existing search engines, at least traditionally, run on text, not ideas. If you want to search for an idea, not a string of words, there's at least a promise that they will do better. The problem is that they make stuff up. So I never know whether to trust them.
Yeah.
So what good is that if it gives me a result and maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't exist?
Yeah.
And I think that there's a systematic reason. And as a cognitive scientist, this is a topic that interests me because I'm interested in how the human intelligence works, natural intelligence. And throughout the history of cognitive science, there's been a conversation between cognitive psychology and artificial intelligence, because artificial intelligence tells you what the whole space of possible minds can be. And so you can say which of those is implemented in the human brain. And it can make theories in cognitive psychology more precise, more quantitative. So I'm interested in possible differences between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. And one of them, which ChatGPT lays bare, is that ChatGPT and other large language models work by a particular technique. They absorb statistical patterns out of massive amounts of text. Now, maybe humans do something like that. We're exposed to a lot of text. On the other hand, to train a human child on a data set that's comparable to GPT would take about 30,000 years. So clearly, human children are much quicker in learning. And I have argued that there is a human capability that ChatGPT approximates but doesn't get exactly. And that is, we have ideas, statements, propositions. We know that there are people, there are places, there are things, there are actions, there are times. GPT doesn't have that, believe it or not. It just has associations, things that tend to appear together, it will reproduce. Whether or not they actually occurred. But there's actually nothing in GPT that actually corresponds to the man crossed the street on Thursday, October 12th. That's what we think about. We think about people and places and things and events. And that's why the large language models are so vulnerable to what they call hallucinations. They mash together things that often occur in proximity in the same text, but don't necessarily correspond to any particular fact. Now, I think there could be an artificial intelligence that, like the human mind, or at least like the way I think of the human mind, has statistical associations, but also has propositions, facts, ideas about people, places, things, events, times. I think that could be potentially both bring the advantages of the large language models, that is, be aware of massive amounts of information and patterning, but also not make these blunders of fact.
So Yuval Noah Harari calls money the pinnacle of human tolerance.
Money?
Money.
Okay, yeah.
As it does not ask about religion, gender, race, age, or sexual orientation. How do you see money, and what do you think about permissionless money like Bitcoin?
Oh, yes. So that is an idea from the Enlightenment. Many of the Enlightenment philosophers extolled commerce. For one thing, they were opposing the royal monopolies and charters of the day. They were also spreading the idea, sometimes called du commerce, gentle commerce, that commerce is a pacifying force because countries that are engaged in trade can find it easier to buy things than to steal them. War is expensive. People get killed. If you just buy it, why bother invading? And you don't kill your customers.
Yes.
So Immanuel Kant, Adam Smith, many of the Enlightenment philosophes extol this. And I think Voltaire said, you go to a bank or a clearinghouse and there's the Jew next to the Arab and next to the Protestant next to the Catholic. And what do they care? They're engaging in trade. How many gods they have is irrelevant. So it is an idea, and there is some evidence for it that the countries that engage in more trade are less likely to go to war. Now, that of course depends on them prioritizing well-being, affluence over other values like greatness, grandeur, national glory, scripture, and maybe the exception that proves the rule is that Russia has been willing to undergo financial hardship, being cut off from the world trade in order to satisfy the dream of greater Russia and Ukraine, part of the Russian people. So there's no guarantee that commerce will bring about peace and tolerance, but it is a force that pushes in that direction.
And you also don't care so much about the religion or the worldview of your customer.
You don't care at all, yes.
You want to sell something.
You want to sell, exactly.
So free trade is very much pacifying. And
well, that was one of the ideals of the Enlightenment. People tend to forget that part of the Enlightenment, but it was a very big deal. Now, of course, anything can be taken to an extreme, and there can also be greed and rapacity. But if you follow the rules and laws of honest exchange, then it can be a pacifying force. Sometimes people say, what's the first thing they say to you when you go into a store? How can I help you? It's as long as it's voluntary, everything is voluntary.
Yes.
Then if you're selling something, you've got to make it worth the while of the person buying it. It's positive sum. That is, in a voluntary trade, both sides are better off.
And we've all been through Corona, where not a lot has been voluntary.
Right. Yes.
So, but in general, do you think that an embrace of tolerance does result in a flourishing of science and progress?
I think so, yes. And the reason is, and we're talking now about intellectual tolerance. The reason is that no one's infallible. No one is omniscient. We're imperfect humans, we're primates. How do we manage to know anything? It's not because you've got one genius who just thinks hard and figures it all out, or an angel gives them the truth. We argue. Many people come up with ideas. Most of them are wrong. Some of them are right. And how do we find out? We express them, we test them, we probe them for flaws. If you disable that process by saying some ideas may not be expressed, then you're almost guaranteed to lock yourself into error. This is the argument that I always give. I'm not the only one, but for why academic freedom is crucial. Not that it's an entitlement of professors, that I just have the right to say anything I want, but the whole enterprise can only work if you have freedom of expression, because everyone thinks they're right, but obviously they can't all be right.
With tolerance is always the questions, can it go too far? What is a suitable object of toleration, and what should not be tolerated? Should we tolerate the intolerant? Probably a question
Yeah.
you have heard many times.
Yeah, so there is, there are, even in the United States, which has probably the most robust protection of free speech, but there are legal limitations. Free speech doesn't mean that you can threaten someone, doesn't mean you can libel them, doesn't mean that you can start a riot. It doesn't mean you can bribe a government official. If you bribe a government, a politician, you can't say, well, I have freedom of speech. There's certain crimes that are inherently executed by speech, and if they're going to be crimes at all, that has to be a limitation of speech. And freedom of speech does not mean that people can't tell you why you're full of crap. You can push back hard and criticize and attack a position. You have no freedom to be immune from criticism. But what it does entail is that people can't be punished or censored for the content of their speech, with certain exceptions, like the ones that I just listed.
So, but there are many people you have to check what they do. For example, there are many people these days shouting Allahu Akbar in Europe these days. They want to put the Sharia law above the ideals of enlightenment when they can. And in your view, has the so-called welcome culture of Angela Merkel in 2015 failed?
Well, several things. I don't think it should be against the law to say Allahu Akbar.
Yes.
I don't think Sharia law should be implemented. I don't think there's any danger of that happening in any European country. But if it's proposed in a local region, there should be very strong arguments against it. If there's incitement to violence, if it's kill the Jews, then yes, that could be illegal, just like a threat can be. That is a noted exception to free speech. In terms of immigration, the Angela Merkel policy, I don't think it's unreasonable to keep in mind the effects of a large influx of population that would, of a particular culture that would have an enclave that could change the character of the society that welcomes them. In general, I think immigration is good. I'm
me too.
a grandchild of immigrants, but and economists say immigration makes everyone better off. But there can, like all things, it has to be multiple considerations have to be weighed. If something is good, there's still trade-offs, and they have to be taken into account.
But if I look into X these days, I have to laugh sometimes. There are groups like Queers for Palestine who oppose the state of Israel and everything it does in Gaza, in the Gaza conflict. So how can their support for a terrorist group that represses homosexuals be understood?
Yes, it is absurd, and that, I think, underscores the insanity of a lot of the critical social justice, intersectional, woke movement, that it is intellectually incoherent. It is a kind of tribalism where the tribes are defined by victim groups and oppressor groups. And that ideology, which has infiltrated a lot of academia, is responsible for a number of the monstrous developments that we have seen in the last month. Queers for Palestine has to be the most idiotic. But the fact that you have student groups, and again, I'll refer to a notorious event at Harvard, 34 student groups, before there was any Israeli retaliation, said the entirety of the blame for the massacre of 1,400 Jews was Israel. Now, how could you possibly, an intelligent person, believe that? How could the murder of 1,400 people Many of them, elderly, children, women, lead to anti-Semitism, lead to antipathy against the victim group instead of sympathy with them. It is an astonishing development of the last 4 weeks that there's been an outpouring of anti-Semitism after Jews were killed. And I think the only one explanation is that there is a widespread form of tribalism where Jews in this belief system fall on the side of oppressors because they're white, and they're colonialist settlers, and that's the only way you can explain this absurdity. Queers for Palestine has been ridiculed, rightly, but it is the ultimate absurdity because a queer person in Palestine would not last long.
Yes. In general, mainstream parties in Germany pride themselves of excluding the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, of any kind of cooperation. What do you think? Is this a sign of healthy democracy or the opposite?
Yeah, so there's, in general, I think it would be healthy democracy, but again, there are always trade-offs, and whether there's some possibility of co-opting them, softening them, moderating them, that's kind of the delicate art of politics that probably you'd have to be in the middle of it to judge.
So if you compare you with other people, you are very clear on all these topics, but others get way more pushback than you. Why does it happen? They often share the same values of enlightenment. I think about, for example, Sam Harris or Douglas Murray or Jordan Peterson. Why is it that you are always...
I don't, I choose my controversies. I don't just jump on every controversy that someone invites me into. For some of the others, like Jordan Peterson has some extra baggage, extra stuff.
That's true, yeah.
He's just, I respect his pushing back at some of the excesses of political correctness, but he also has his embrace of Jung and Nietzsche. I don't think he is an Enlightenment humanist, and so he does come from a different set of convictions. And he also takes on needless things. He went on a rant about Sports Illustrated having a fat woman in a swimsuit. It's like, why get upset about that? It's like, I think is marketing genius on the part of Sports Illustrated because everyone's talking about it.
Yes, yeah.
But putting that aside, but anyway, there are extra battles that he fights that I think are unnecessary. Sam Harris, I'm not sure. I think he was much more clearer and much more adamant about some of the inherent problems with radical Islam in an era in which everyone wanted to stay away from that. And he got a lot of enemies when he was arguing against religion in general for being very blunt about some of the violent tendencies in Orthodox Islam. So he earned some extra enemies. But I'm not sure because his views are not extreme, but he is fearless.
But the whole thing has changed. I mean, these days many people are on podcasts. They don't write so many books. Do you follow these their podcasts, or how do you follow the other intellectuals?
Yeah.
Has it changed for you? Like obviously it has. If you
it is.
look back 20 years.
It has changed that there's the culture is much more auditory and visual. It used to be people would say, "Oh, I recognize you from your book jacket or from the New York Times," and now it's, "Oh, I saw you on Joe Rogan," or on this podcast or that podcast. Audio books sell very, very well. And there are an explosion of podcasts. I get far more invitations than I can accept. I rarely listen to podcasts.
You rarely listen to it?
I find it not, unless they're transcribed. I just find it not very efficient use of time because speech is slower than reading.
Yes, you prefer reading, fast reading.
I absolutely prefer reading. Some people just listen to podcasts at sped up, at double speed.
Oh yeah,
But
many young people do.
They do, but I like to be able to backtrack easily,
Yeah.
read a sentence 2 or 3 times. So for me, it's still print or text, not necessarily on dead trees.
But what, which intellectuals which came up newly do you like? Which one do you read? Which one do you listen to?
There are a lot of actually quite brilliant young people that are in new outlets like Persuasion, a magazine begun by Yasha Monk, a German American at Johns Hopkins. Quillette magazine has features a lot of new writers. There are many. I have found that a number of recent PhDs, graduates, have decided not to go into academia because they say you can't say what you want.
Yeah.
And so
it's completely changing.
Yes, so they start Substack subscriptions or blogs, podcasts, try to earn a living in other ways.
Last questions. If there would be a contest to win the title of the most intolerant group in the world, who would you name a winner?
The most intolerant group. Well, I think
Taliban.
There's so many contenders.
Hamas.
Well, sir,
universities.
No, I don't think it would be universities. I'm going to criticize universities. Well, would I rather be at Harvard University, which came in last place, or in Iran, or Putin's Russia, or Xi's China, or Saudi Arabia, or Iran? I'd rather be at Harvard.
Yes.
So as bad as the universities are, as bad as Harvard is, there's much worse. You have to keep things in perspective. So I would say it's a tie between the Islamic dictatorships, the Russian dictatorship, the Chinese dictatorship.
Mr. Pinker, thank you for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.